It's always a party that's been a little shy of ideological expression. It's always been a little distrustful of outright political doctrine. Is there a conservatism for the 21st century?
Yes. Whether or not it's currently going to take form in the Conservative Party is a different question. One of the things I've always slightly envied writers about French politics on the right compared to British is in French they've got René Ramon's wonderful conception of, I don't know if you've heard of it, of the French right as basically three schools of monarchists, the Bonapartists, Orleanists and Legitimists, and you trace those threads through hundreds of years of history. Whereas somewhat ironically, the Conservative Party in Britain's history tends to get written about as a series of revolutions, where one thing comes along and defeats the previous thing. And so we don't have that sense of like, what are the intellectual strands that are competing within the Conservative Party? But maybe somewhat ironically, given the current condition of it, I think that it is actually much easier to see a coherent centre-right, right-wing response to this country's challenges at the moment than centre-left. Because on paper at least, a Conservative government would be okay with cutting public spending. It would be more at ease with, for example, allowing our unsustainably large third university sector to shrink. Be more in favour of finding ways to cut immigration and so on and so forth. And if you look at the issues which I think are going to define British politics over the next decade or so, it's things like mass immigration, the ECHR, and obviously the economy, where amazingly, according to polling, the Conservatives still lead on economic management. It is just the default setting of the British soul that they're just...
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Of course, the last Labour government was able to be successful partly on the back of, after 1992, the Tory reputation for economic competency collapsing after Black Wednesday. That seems to have, the default setting of British politics seems to have restored itself.
But also New Labour, one, in their first term, they committed to following Tory spending proposals. So that's a sign of how, even after Black Wednesday. But two, they spent loads of money. I feel really sorry for Sir Keir Starmer when people are like, oh, why isn't he more like New Labour? This is like New Labour without the charm or without the strategy. It's like, no, New Labour is nothing without the money, right? If Starmer was in a position where he'd inherited a strongly growing low tax economy, where he could just keep ramping up public spending year on year for 10 years, he'd be a very popular Prime Minister.
Anthony, let me ask you, the Conservative Party has often been incredibly successful in its past reinventions. Why is it struggling to reinvent itself now? If we take as true what Henry's saying, is there is what seems like a possible mode of reinvention, why does it seem to struggle to articulate itself?
One thing, James, you said that if the Tory party is the party of the wealthy, I think it may or may not be true to say that the Conservative Party is the party of the aspirational. So if you go back into the 19th century, they were not wealthy, the angels in marble, working class Tories, but they were aspiring to move upward. The Conservative Party, in contrast to the Liberal Party before it, which was ideological, and Labour, which is more tied to ideological positions, less so from Blair onwards, which of course was part of the problem itself, the Conservative Party is supremely well positioned to keep moving in the light of new technological, economic, social, political change. And it finds these extraordinary new leaders. The old leader is jettisoned with the consummate ease that the Tory party has in jettisoning its leaders. It revivifies the party organisation, the party's finances, but the core sense that this is a party around nation, around the monarchy, around property, around the rule of law, around stability, over change, evolutionary, not revolutionary change. These principles have been articulated by a series of leaders from Peel onwards, and Disraeli and Salisbury. I just got to, and Baldwin and Churchill, Macmillan and Thatcher. And that the party has not found somebody to re-articulate that vision, not the least in the light of these extraordinary changes that Henry was referring to below the surface, the substructural changes, and in the light of Labour becoming a much more adaptive party in many ways. Tony Blair, in seeing the fluidity of Labour, was making it into the position that the Tory party had traditionally held. And it hasn't found the leader with the opportunity to articulate that new vision. And so I've less seen, as I look back, one Tory party. I've seen the Peel party, the Disraeli party, the Salisbury party, and you see, as you go around London and you go around the country, you see vestiges, remnants of their particular brands of Tories, not least in the houses that you see. And so it is remarkable that 2023 was the last time that a Conservative Party leader did not go on and become Prime Minister, but now we've had 4. I mean, Kemi Badenoch may become Prime Minister, but I think, really, I wouldn't be the only 2 people who would think that it would be unlikely. Though you never know. But that would be 4 in a row, and possibly 5, and possibly 6 in a row. So I think it's both her that she has managed to define this new vision. She hasn't made it into a Badenoch Conservative Party in the way that we're still living in Thatcher's. These defining prime ministers and party leaders, subsequent leaders, either try and be like them or not like them, but none can escape their shadow. And we're still living in many ways in the Thatcher party. And so I think it is grim. And whether this is going to be the moment, whether Rishi Sunak will be the last Conservative in Downing Street or not, I don't know, but it has to be an open question.
That's one of the arguments you make in your book on the office of Prime Minister, the impossible office, that there are these sort of epochal and office-defining prime ministers, and Thatcher was the last one. You don't include Blair in that number.
You see, I don't include Blair because I think Blair remodelled the Labour Party, but he didn't remodel the country sufficiently for the opportunity that he had. And he also took the country into a war that was unnecessary, extraordinarily damaging to Britain's position in the world. He didn't remodel Britain's position with the EU, although he said he would do that. And he didn't. The promise was of remaking Britain for the 21st century, and to have had, I think he did a lot of good things. I think he was a remarkable prime minister, but I think he squandered his first term. I think it was too reactive, too short term, as he now sees. Yeah. That was the moment he had his most political capital. He got on top of it in that second term. He was just about to deliver a defining speech down in Brighton to the TUC conference on the 11th of September. He was fiddling with his cufflinks as he was reading over the speech, getting ready to go down to deliver it, and wham, 9/11. And that speech had the seeds of what would have been a remodelled. And by the time it started coming out in the wake of 9/11, in the wake of, with all the lost capital over Iraq, it was much harder to do so.
Well, I was just thinking in your list of qualities or criteria or core beliefs of the Conservative Party. Most of them, not all of them, most of them.
Church of England had a sense of faith, a sense of duty, which I think conspicuously is lost. A sense there's something bigger than ourselves, and that we have that service to others, national service, civil service, public service, military service, intelligence service, is what we need to build the fabric of a nation.
Yes, it struck me that most of those qualities could also be shared, certainly by the post-Blair Labour Party, and certainly when it's in power. And that's one of the problems I think that faces the Conservative Party, is that it doesn't have so coherently class-conscious or insurrectionist a Labour Party to define itself against, which has been true. So someone like the historian and political theorist Corey Robin, an American, mostly writing about American conservatism, says that one of the difficulties American conservatism in particular encounters or has encountered over the last 20, 30 years is having defeated communism, having, in one way or another taken apart New Deal liberalism, it didn't have a coherent antagonist to define itself against. And I wonder whether that's been true for the Conservative Party in Britain after Blair, that it's not had, or certainly now after Corbyn, it's not had so coherent an enemy to define itself against.
I think that there's certainly some truth to that. I think the right very often ends up by default in the reactive space, but sometimes I think much more than it should, and it concedes to its opponents the right to be the motive force in politics, and therefore it does end up If you look at the right tends to be the one pole, the left tends to be the one pole, and then anyone who doesn't like them ends up on the right, and can often be quite a broad church. So that's true. I think as well that the challenge for the Conservatives with the kind of diminution of class consciousness that you were talking about is, I was recently reading, trying to read, it's a very long book, Vilfredo Pareto's Circulation of Elites. And I think that one of the things that you talked about was Ed West alluding to the fact that it gave in on social liberalism. Now, I don't necessarily agree with Ed on all of that, but I think that one of the interesting things is that where does the Conservative Party get its leadership from, right? Who is it recruiting? From what reservoirs of talent is it recruiting? And there aren't that many explicitly conservative ones. If you went back 2 generations, school teachers, the average school teacher, conservative, right? There would be conservative bankers, artists, and everything else. And nowadays, you tend to get individuals who want to be conservatives, but in very, very few circumstances, unless they're, I don't know, gentry, is their average social milieu going to be conservative. And that has big implications for whether or not you stand your ground on social issues. Now, I actually think that we might be about to enter into a quite interesting period on social politics for the Conservative Party, because 2 things are happening. Abortion up to birth and the assisted dying bill, with which a lot of Conservatives are deeply, deeply uncomfortable, especially actually younger Conservatives, as far as I can see. There seems to be a kind of tide line in the party of about 35, where people I speak to on different sides of that divide, it's not so much that they should be in different parties as it sounds like they grew up on different planets. And I think that therefore we might actually be about to see social policy become a dividing line again, in the way it hasn't been in a while. But yes, historically, Conservatives and Labour represented broad social forces. And I agree entirely that the Conservatives, aspirational people, it wasn't just the wealthy, it was the aspirational. But the whole point of that was, you only get aspirational voters if it feels like it's within reach, right? It's like what's the line about the American voter endlessly frustrating the left because it's like they're all temporarily embarrassed millionaires, right? So in the days when you could see somebody like you or your dad or your brother who now had the nice house, the car on the driveway, the foreign holidays and so on. I used to be asked ahead of the last election by some forlorn Tory MPs, like, do you reckon there are shy Tories? And I ended up able to give the speech in my sleep. I was like, who was a shy Tory in 1992? They went to a dinner party and people were talking about that nice Mr. Kinnock and all the rest of it, and they sort of nodded along. And then they went home to a semi-detached or detached house, 2 cars in the driveway. Maybe their wife worked, maybe she didn't. She didn't really have to. Kids in a nice private school that cost a few grand a year. They had foreign holidays and they remembered outdoor plumbing. And so, of course, they voted for the Conservative Party. That voter doesn't exist now. Aspiration doesn't feel within reach. And so that aspirational class evaporated.